Welcome to this explainer. Okay, let's dive right into this because today we are untangling a massive geopolitical mystery. What we're looking at is a highly contested puzzle where the United States and Iran are projecting two vastly different realities to the rest of the world. On one hand, you have one side trumpeting a historic diplomatic victory, while the other is signaling deep skepticism and demanding steep concessions before even coming to the table. We are looking at a potential breakthrough agreement, for sure, but the details are literally as explosive as the conflict itself. Unpacking the friction between these two narratives is absolutely crucial if we want to understand what happens next. To kick things off, President Trump made a pretty bombastic announcement on social media, claiming an interim agreement was scheduled to be signed on Sunday. Now, you have to consider the context of this timeline, because Sunday was not just any random day on the calendar. It actually happened to be the president's 80th birthday. And, rather astonishingly, it coincided with a massive UFC fight event being hosted right there on the White House South Lawn. The optics here are very deliberate. It paints a vivid, highly produced picture of imminent victory and celebration on the domestic front. But as we strip away all that pageantry, the reality on the ground paints a much more complicated and dangerous picture. So we have to ask the critical question, are the US and Iran actually making a deal? We have to ground all of this high-level diplomatic posturing in physical reality. Right as the White House was expressing utmost confidence about a looming celebratory agreement, the U.S. military was out there actively engaging targets, shooting down multiple Iranian attack drones near the Strait of Hormuz. This violent disconnect proves that despite the optimistic talk coming from Washington, human lives are still at risk. Commercial shipping lanes, the very arteries of global trade, remain under active threat. And global energy markets are still on the line, reacting to every single missile launch and drone strike. Part 1. Two very different stories. We are supposedly looking at the exact same memorandum of understanding, but the disconnect is just massive. It's a classic Rashomon effect. On one side, the U.S. is claiming a deal gets signed immediately, asserting that no money exchanges hands up front, and guaranteeing that the Strait of Hormuz opens to everyone without restriction. Okay, but then on the other side, Iran's Revolutionary Guard and Foreign Ministry are pushing back hard. They firmly state the framework is absolutely not finalized. They insist any signing would likely be remote, rejecting the idea of a joint photo op, and rather than just opening Hormuz freely, Iran is actually demanding mandatory service fees for transit. Essentially, they are trying to monetize one of the world's most critical maritime choke points. To really anchor the abstract concept of sanctions relief, I want you to consider this massive figure, $24 billion. That is the reported amount in frozen Iranian assets scattered across global banks that Tehran is allegedly demanding as a crucial negotiating chip. State media in Iran claims they want half of this, $12 billion, released immediately upon signing the interim framework. You can see why this causes incredible diplomatic friction, right? Demanding billions in liquid capital up front fundamentally clashes with the U.S. claim that absolutely no money is changing hands before behavioral changes are verified. It transforms what is supposed to be a diplomatic pause into a massive financial transaction. And the demands go even further, illustrating what a deal actually looks like on paper from Tehran's perspective. Iranian state media recently leaked a 14-point draft of the agreement, and the terms are incredibly favorable to Iran. First, they demand a permanent cessation of the war in Lebanon. This isn't just a talking point, it's a massive red line for them to protect their regional influence. Second, they require lifting the U.S. naval blockade entirely. Third, as we just noted, immediately unfreezing those billions in assets. And finally, fully suspending all oil and petrochemical sanctions. If implemented, this framework wouldn't just pause the conflict. It would fundamentally revitalize the Iranian economy and its regional power projection. But here is where we find a really surprising touch of irony in modern statecraft. President Trump quickly fired back on social media, dismissing those leaked Iranian terms entirely as fake news. But almost immediately after that U.S. dismissal, Iran's foreign minister posted a very similar sentiment, stating that the media needs to stop speculating on the contents of the deal. So in a rare, highly unusual moment of alignment, both the U.S. president and the Iranian foreign minister actually agreed on one thing: urging the public to ignore the leaks and wait for the official document. It's kind of a fascinating moment where both adversaries are desperately trying to control the narrative of a deeply unstable process. Section 2. The Nuclear Dust Dispute. Let's shift our focus to the most technically complex and volatile part of this puzzle: the future of Iran's nuclear program. The crucial point here is understanding what the U.S. actually means by nuclear dust. This is President Trump's specific, highly publicized term for Iran's stockpiles of highly enriched uranium. According to defense officials, the U.S. is pushing for a strict, performance-based moratorium on enrichment. This is vastly different from the original JCPOA agreement, which, as you might recall, allowed for managed, heavily monitored enrichment limits. The current U.S. position is much wider in scope and significantly less forgiving. They want the nuclear material completely destroyed or permanently downblended before any permanent sanctions relief is granted. But consider the physical reality underground. U.S. intelligence indicates that Iran has dramatically escalated efforts to seal off its near bomb-grade uranium from any potential military strikes or international inspectors. They are actively, deliberately collapsing tunnels and extensively booby-trapping facility entrances with explosives. Now, that is not the behavior of a nation preparing to hand over its stockpiles. It strongly signals that, regardless of what interim framework is signed on paper, Iran has a deep institutional desire to protect its physical assets and maintain its latent nuclear capabilities at all costs. Section 3. Global and Regional Ripples. Now, let's broaden the lens of this explainer a bit, because this is far from just a bilateral dispute between Washington and Tehran. The cascading effects on the global order are profound. Because of the ongoing conflict and the uncertainty of U.S. protection, traditional Gulf allies like the UAE are reportedly paying billions in side deals to find their own independent accommodations with Iran. This effectively undermines a unified U.S. regional strategy. Meanwhile, China is strategically stepping in, emerging from all this geopolitical chaos as a highly reliable great power and energy partner to the Middle East. And, crucially, vast amounts of U.S. military equipment, logistics, and capabilities remain deeply tied up in managing this Middle Eastern friction. That means those exact resources are no longer available for defending critical strategic interests over in the Indo-Pacific. And the ripples reach all the way to NATO, causing deep, unprecedented damage to European relations. For decades, the U.S. has provided a historic bedrock security guarantee to Europe, but experts note a severe fracturing is occurring right now. Because the U.S. recently called for NATO involvement in a Middle Eastern conflict they didn't consult their allies on, and the allies firmly said no, there are now active reports that the U.S. is looking to significantly reduce military assets in Europe. This effectively signals a rapid, active decoupling of U.S. security from the European continent, fundamentally altering the post-war security architecture as we know it. Then there is the massive, deeply entrenched, and unresolved risk point, Israel and Hezbollah. We cannot overstate how regional proxy conflicts are often the exact things that derail high-level nuclear diplomacy. Currently, 1% of the entire Israeli population has been displaced from the north due to ongoing violence. Hezbollah, a designated terrorist group and Iran's most powerful proxy, flat out refuses to disarm. Simultaneously, Iran is stubbornly insisting on a complete ceasefire in Lebanon as a core prerequisite for this broader deal, while Israel firmly retains the sovereign right to defend itself against cross-border attacks. This single, highly volatile factor could easily scuttle the entire diplomatic framework before the ink is even dry. Section 4. The 60-day ticking clock. Which brings us to the actual mechanics of what happens next. Let's figure out what a deal to make a deal actually means moving forward. The procedure breaks down perfectly right here into two distinct phases. Step 1 is simply signing the Memorandum of Understanding. It's absolutely crucial to understand that all this does is hit pause on the kinetic war and extend the ceasefire. Honestly, it's the easy part, because it immediately triggers Step 2, a dedicated window for incredibly complex, highly technical negotiations over those nuclear capabilities and the specific mechanics of sanctions relief. Hitting pause is simple, but history shows us that these granular, highly technical negotiations in Step 2 are exactly where these ambitious deals go to die. And before we get too optimistic about this particular framework, consider this highly surprising fact. By national security counts, President Trump has publicly claimed a deal is close nearly 40 times before. 39 times. Experts warn that consistently telegraphing an intense public desperation for a deal, especially on the eve of major domestic events, might actually be giving away crucial negotiating leverage. Think about it. When you announce a deal is imminent 39 times, it naturally prompts an adversary like Iran to push harder, hold out longer, and demand significantly more concessions each time they come to the table. And that ultimately leads us to this giant looming number, 60. If and when this memorandum is signed, it starts an impending 60-day ticking clock. Those 60 days of intense technical negotiations will carry the weight of literally everything we've just discussed. The fate of billions of dollars in frozen assets, the security of deeply entrenched global alliances, and the physical reality of booby-trapped nuclear tunnels. they all hinge on this very narrow window. This 60-day period will ultimately decide whether the nuclear dust is actually buried or if the region's friction combusts once again. So, I leave you with this final thought. Will this highly precarious 60-day framework hold under the immense, crushing weight of billions of dollars, regional proxy wars, and fortified nuclear tunnels? Or will this geopolitical puzzle collapse once again, pulling the entire Middle East and the broader global economy right back into active conflict? Keep your eyes on the clock, because the next 60 days will change everything. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep learning.